A blacksmith never trusts cold metal, because cold metal lies. It holds its shape, it even looks finished. It looks strong right up until the moment real weight is placed on it. Then it doesn't bend. It doesn't adjust. It shatters all at once in a way that surprises everyone except the blacksmith, because he already knew. He knew the moment he saw it was never put through the fire. You've been asking God for a crown, for favor, for breakthrough, for the door to open, the diagnosis to change, the marriage to heal, the money to finally arrive before the end of the month instead of 3 days after it. And you've been asking sincerely. That part isn't the problem. The problem is what you've been expecting that crown to sit on. Because a crown needs a head that has actually been through fire. And most of us are trying to wear one on a head that has never once felt the heat. Here's the sentence that should make you uncomfortable. So sit with it before you move past it. The blessing you keep praying for was never designed to attach itself to a life that has refused to be forged. Stay with that thought, because in the next few minutes you're going to see exactly how this quiet exchange works. The one almost nobody names out loud, where believers ask for the finished product of faith while rejecting the one process that actually produces it. Think for a moment about what a blacksmith actually does step by step, because every step matters. He doesn't hand you a crown. He hands you raw ore, dull, shapeless, ugly, worthless looking to anyone untrained. Then he does the one thing that looks from the outside almost cruel. He puts it into the fire, not to destroy it, to reveal what it was actually made of the entire time. Inside that heat, the impurities rise to the surface and burn away, one layer at a time, whether the metal wants them gone or not. What's left underneath is denser, purer, able to hold a shape it was never capable of holding before the fire touched it. Then comes the part most people skip entirely in their imagination: the hammer. Repeated strikes, not random violence, but calculated pressure applied at the exact moment the metal is soft enough to be reshaped and hot enough to bond permanently with itself. Skip the fire, and the hammer only cracks it into pieces. Skip the hammer, and the fire only melts it into a puddle with no form at all, spreading flat, useless, unable to hold anything. And there's a third step almost nobody talks about, the one that separates a blacksmith from an amateur: the quench. The sudden plunge from white-hot into cold water. It sounds like punishment. It sounds like the opposite of mercy. But without that shock, the structure never locks into place. The metal stays soft, stays reversible, stays vulnerable to the next hand that wants to bend it back into something else. The quench is what makes the shape permanent. What feels in the moment like the cruelest part of the entire process is actually the part that guarantees the crown will still be a crown a decade from now, under real pressure, in a real storm. This is what a well-known teacher meant almost a century ago when he warned about something he called cheap grace, forgiveness sold without any cost attached to it, a crown handed out without the receiver ever once touching the forge. He said it plainly, and it still lands like a blade. A gift like that isn't really the gift at all. It's a copy, and copies don't hold weight. They only hold appearance, right up until the moment appearance is tested. Now here's where this stops being a history lesson and starts being a mirror, because you've almost certainly done this without ever naming it. You've asked for the promotion, but not for the character that survives a demotion. You've asked for the marriage to be saved, but refused the humility that makes you the one who changes first, every single time, without keeping score. You've asked for peace of mind, but avoided the daily discipline, the unglamorous, repetitive, unphotographed obedience that actually produces peace instead of merely performing it in front of other people for a season before quietly abandoning it. There's a phrase from an ancient teaching that gets quoted constantly and understood rarely: take my yoke. People hear the word yoke and immediately picture a burden, something extra, something bolted on top of a life that already feels heavy enough. But a yoke was never an extra weight. A yoke is the shape. It's the wooden frame that connects the animal to the load in a way that the pulling doesn't tear the animal apart in the process. Remove the yoke and the weight doesn't disappear. It doesn't get lighter. It simply gets applied wrong, dragging sideways, twisting the spine, wrecking the very creature that was supposed to be carrying it forward. That's the exact trick your mind is playing on you right now, quietly, underneath your own awareness. You believe that refusing the yoke means avoiding weight. It doesn't. Life still has weight either way: the bills, the diagnosis, the loneliness at 11 at night, the decision you keep circling instead of making. The only real question is whether that weight moves through a structure built to hold it, or whether it just lands raw, untranslated, crushing whatever it touches. Here's something researchers have documented that fits this pattern almost too precisely. It's called moral licensing, the tendency for a person to believe that one good act earns them permission to skip the next required one. Show up to church, feel a flicker of virtue, and unconsciously believe you've now earned the right to gossip in the parking lot without consequence. Pray sincerely for 5 minutes, and feel licensed to avoid the actual obedience that prayer was supposed to lead you toward for the rest of the day. It isn't hypocrisy in the dramatic headline sense. It's quieter than that. It's bookkeeping. It's the soul keeping a private ledger where sincerity gets treated as a substitute for surrender, when the two were never meant to be interchangeable. Picture two people sitting in the same church pew this Sunday. Both prayed for the same breakthrough 18 months ago. Both looked, from the outside, equally sincere, equally desperate, equally deserving. One of them let the fire actually touch the request, stayed in the process, took the hammer strikes, endured the quench when it came faster and colder than expected. The other one asked for the exact same outcome, but the moment the heat arrived, stepped back out of the forge and waited by the door instead, still holding the same raw, unshaped ore, still calling it faith. 18 months later, one of them can carry real weight without cracking. The other is still praying the same prayer, wondering why the ceiling feels like it's made of iron. The difference was never the sincerity of the request. It was whether they stayed inside the one process built to make the answer survivable. And this is exactly the moment where most teaching stops, right before the uncomfortable part actually arrives. So let's not stop here. If moral licensing explains why we skip the forge, the ore itself explains what happens the moment we do. Ore left unforged does not stay neutral, patiently waiting for a more convenient season to arrive. It oxidizes. It rusts. The very forces that would have refined it inside the fire will corrode it instead once it's left sitting in the open air. There is no neutral holding pattern available for a soul that keeps avoiding formation. You are always either being shaped or you are being worn down. Those are the only two options that actually exist, and time chooses one of them for you whether you consent to it or not. So what does this actual forging look like for you, this week, in an ordinary life that involves no literal hammer and no literal anvil? It looks like staying inside the hard conversation instead of exiting the moment your pride gets bruised. It looks like the 10th day of a discipline nobody is clapping for, and the 20th, and the 90th. It looks like forgiving someone with zero guarantee they'll ever apologize, because the goal was never their apology in the first place. The goal was always your shape. It looks like praying "not my will" and actually meaning it, specifically in the one area where you've been quietly negotiating with God for years, hoping he'd forget the negotiation was ever happening. None of that feels in the moment like receiving a blessing. That is exactly the point being made here. The forge never feels like the crown while you're inside it. It only ever feels like heat and pressure, and the shock of cold water arriving faster than you expected. The crown arrives after and only after, because the crown was never a separate reward waiting at the far end of the process for surviving it. The crown is the forged metal, finished. It's the same raw material you started with, just shaped now, just able to hold weight it could never have held before. So here's the real question sitting underneath everything you've just heard, and it deserves more than a passing thought. Is there a specific blessing you've been asking for, while quietly, maybe even unconsciously, refusing the one process that would let you actually carry it without it destroying you the moment it arrives? Sit with that tonight. Not with panic and not with shame, with honesty, because the door isn't closed and the fire isn't out. The only thing still undecided is whether you'll finally step toward the heat or keep polishing cold metal in the dark and calling it a crown, right up until the day real weight finally lands on it and reveals, to everyone watching, what it was actually made of the whole time.